Hi, everybody. I'm Arinn Dembo. So all of us pretty much in this room know what narrative design is already, or at least we have a preconception of what it is and what parts of a game it touches. This is not about that for the most part, so I will run through what this presentation is about and what it is not. But I'm talking about hidden lore, right? The parts of narrative design that are less obvious and that are probably applicable by almost everybody in this room, no matter what genre your game is. So what do I mean by a story? Is there a story in your game? A lot of people get trapped because they think a story is a narrative only, just like a recounting of a sequence of events in some specific order. Generally speaking, a narrative has to have a specific point that is author created. Games often just have stories, and a story is just a sequence of events. And what's interesting about games as a medium is that the sequence of events can be player selected, even player created. The number and nature of events in the story that they experience can be randomized by their own actions, things like that. And that presents some significant challenges in terms of creating an experience, in terms of achieving a narrative. So nonetheless, as the stuff unfolds in real time, there are still narrative design elements that you can employ no matter what their experience is going to be. We're all pretty much familiar with the standard narrative design tools that we have available. And we tend to confine them to genres that easily employ them. So we'll have RPGs, things like that, adventure games, where we have a branching mission path and we can sort of force somebody down a tunnel. And we have all of these tools like scripted dialogue and scripted cutscenes and cinematics. And then there are also an entire genre of games that are cheaper, that are just text-based, and there are text-based mechanics in a lot of our games where we can just dump some text on people. Look, I'm telling you a story now, or my character is talking to you now, etc. It's use all those tools, definitely, but there are others. So does every good game need a story yet? No. Right? I mean, the story of some of our favorite games is, my friend Dugan is going to be sorry when I get better at this game and I can button mash him to death. But nonetheless, there are some games that really profit from a little bit of lore. And by that, I mean a little bit of thought and a little bit of character that goes into the design, that goes into, presenting the mechanics to jazz them up a bit. So I thought I would start off outside of my own sandbox so that I'm not just polishing my apple all through this presentation and talk about somebody other than me. And I'd go with a AAA game study from a company that I really like, Harmonix. And the reason why I admire them in many ways is because they are very much like you and I in the sense that they started off as indie developers with some cool ideas and some passion about what they wanted to create. They wanted to create games about music. So they started off, and they got a pretty good deal, managed to form a relationship with a publisher, and they made a game called Frequency. Has anyone here played this game? Anyone? Cool. This is awesome. I'm glad some people here know. So this first starts coming out in 2001, and we have a mix of 27 almost completely original songs, and the music generated by Gameplay. We have this kind of cool music tunnel effect, right? Which, I'm not sure. I don't think it's ever been stated openly, but it seems like it's kind of inspired by a game called Tempest. Has anyone played that? It's from 1981. Any other dinosaurs in the crowd? Yeah. Frequency, cool game. A lot of people would say it's one of the better games for PlayStation 2, even if they're sentimental about it. But the summary of the team was, didn't sell. So then they make another game. Anyone been on Kickstarter lately? They did another game called Amplitude. That was released 2003, They created this sort of little ship guy that you use to shoot the notes as you're playing along, and they kind of opened up that music tunnel so that you weren't quite so claustrophobic because the music tunnel wasn't working for people. They had 26 songs in it, including a few pop tracks now, so, they're starting to get to that point. And this was a really critically acclaimed game, right? And it's fondly remembered by enough people that they were able to re-kickstart it for a reboot this year, I believe, and pulled in like 844K, something like that. So quite a lot, right? And that's a level. That's a sign of the audience that still remembered it fondly. Nonetheless, again, critically acclaimed, but didn't sell. So. Around the same year, they started off on a branching path. So as developers, they formed a relationship with another publisher and released a game called Karaoke Revolution. And they had access to a pop music catalog. But they also created like a little human avatar, right? For you to send, like some interesting singing mechanics. And, they started to notice that people were sort of connecting to that human avatar. And they kind of even liked, dressing it up like a little doll, and as you were like winning the game. And it came bundled with a Logitech peripheral, and like I said, this was sort of the beginning of the snowball for them. And eventually, it started to all come together. So we have a new relationship here, and it's like this is sort of the break point, the watershed moment. It's 2005, and they have a 47-track initial main catalog, almost all licensed popular music, right? Which is great, and it's one of the things that people, constantly point to as a cause for the success of this game. They have this expensive peripheral controller that everybody liked, but what they also had was a hell of a lot more narrative design elements, right? So we have, people applying the lessons that they've learned, that they didn't, people just couldn't relate to these abstract visuals that they had in previous games, even the ones that are critically acclaimed, right? So they start showing graphics of humans performing music, right? And they really kind of create this little character that people can identify with and start to, feel like there's a story to the game, and the story is about me becoming a big star. And here's like, again, more lessons being applied, right? So we have multiple peripherals, lots of instruments. We're putting in the microphone and the singing mechanics from Karaoke Revolution. 58 songs on the main set list, and a lot of access to others. But more so, we're still applying the narrative design lessons. And what was interesting to me is that, at GDC 210, Harmonix's team came forward, and they said they basically pointed out at the Narrative Design Summit that the narrative design innovations were one of the huge things, one of the things that really made the difference in terms of getting ordinary people, right, normal people like casual players to really engage with this game and even invest in these expensive peripherals and things like that. The fantasy of the human connection and the little story that was sort of inherent in this. And what they said is, if you are a developer and you don't think your game has a story, reconsider. There is probably some sort of possible narrative connection that is connected to the mechanics of your game, and you can employ it, and you can use it to hook your audience. So what do we have, right? We have sometimes some really overwhelming challenges, especially the more sandboxy a game is, right? The more open the world, the more that we have no control over the actions of the player and where they're going to go and what they're going to do next, the harder it is to create a story. And nonetheless, I kind of picked out this Penny Arcade cartoon because I thought it really exemplified the story of Minecraft, right? The story of Minecraft that all of us have had, that have lived through if we've played the game, right? It's about being hunted and scared and by yourself and trying to figure out how to punch a tree alone. And in the darkness, the monsters come, right? And eventually we've, achieved this state where we have a fortress against the night, right? It's like, yeah, perfect. That's the Minecraft story. Who would have thought? But there is one. So what is the secret story of your game, right? My question then is, if I'm in a sandbox, or if I'm in a puzzle game, or if I'm in a platformer where two guys punch each other, or whatever it is, what can there be? What can I use, right? What tools are available to me? And my point is that there are some that are a little more subtle, and that you seldom think about, that can do a lot to give people a sense of immersion and connection and character identification. There can be an in-game clock, right? A ticking clock in it that changes conditions. You can have player-triggered game events. You can have random events. You can have, level design and environmental conditions that tell a story in a way. You can have all sorts of, things that are outside of the box of the game. I don't know, has anyone seen the Blair Witch Project? Was anyone paying attention the summer that the Blair Witch Project came out? Because from my perspective, the most brilliant piece of the Blair Witch Project was actually like a 1 hour, what amounts to a commercial, like a little viral thing that they put out, for people to watch the summer before the movie came out, right? And that sort of mini documentary, which was about why anybody would want to go into those godforsaken woods, was, really set the stage for the entire thing, and yet it was outside of the box of the movie. So I'd already been watching the Blair Witch Project for an hour by the time I arrived. And this is again, it's a seldom considered thing, but there is a lot of opportunities for you to connect with your audience and preload your story, preload the universe of your game long before they even buy it. I've been hired in the past to do all sorts of narrative design stuff for websites. For major publishers. So these are things that can have an impact. Faction design is huge. Background fiction that just exists in the well of your house as a studio or as a team. Maybe the fans get to read it, maybe they don't, but it exists there for you. And it just serves as a creative well. So I'm just going to bring up some examples now that I've actually worked with. This is from the first game that I did as a professional developer. I was working with a writing team, and we were called in freelance to assist with some narrative design on a game, which some of you might be familiar with. When my writing partner came to the first meeting, the two factions of the game were generic enough that they were still being referred to as Race A and Race B. This is how much work there was to do. It was quite challenging. But nonetheless, we sat down, and in a surprisingly short period of time, there was a richly endowed universe from which this conflict and the campaign that the players would be going through could emerge, and in which the players could immerse themselves. So what are the benefits of the lore background that the publisher paid for in this particular case? Well, we created some personality, right? A sense of identification that, players could then be engaged with when they went through the campaign. Because even though, the graphics and the mechanics and the music of the game were already extraordinary long before we arrived, there wasn't really a sense of engagement. It wasn't grabbing people the way it had to. And that's the thing, is sometimes, the writing that goes into it, the narrative design that goes into it, it's like presentation at a restaurant. If you don't put that twig of parsley on it, somehow it doesn't look professional. This is one of those things. The players were able to engage with that fictional universe, and what's more important, we gave them some hooks for their own imagination so that they could take off with it. So the formation of multiplayer groups in particular, right? They used that material to help them build their guilds, clans, their multiplayer groups. And it, eventually, that kind of engagement, people wanting to know what happens next, people feeling like that universe exists and that they're a part of it, is part of what drives demand for sequels or expansions. Even, if sales might be a little mediocre, there's enough noise happening that sometimes that makes a big difference. So just as an example, I decided the other day to look up this, completely goofy made-up word that I added when I was creating the background fiction for this particular game. So, this is a word that I made up 10 years ago or whatever. And you Google it now, there's like 86,000 results for it. And every single one of them is a player-created page for this particular game. So that is what lore can do for you that nothing else can. No, come back. Okay. So I'm just going to pick I'm picking just a few examples. I can't go through everything, but here's a player-triggered event. This is a booby trap. I built it into the mechanics of sort of the stars. It's called an AI rebellion. It's triggered by, player research. So what happens in an AI rebellion? Well, you're moving along, you're researching AIs, they make your economy better, or they can be, put onto your starships to make them shoot better. If the AI rebellion happens to you, suddenly, all of these artificial citizens just decide they don't feel like serving you anymore. And they take off with half of your ships and start taking over the planets in your empire. And they become an entirely other faction in the game. The AI rebellion wins this game on a number of occasions. So all of a sudden, every player who's gone through this sandbox game with infinite replayability has had this happen to them at least once, and some of them have probably lost to it more than once. I created a climate of terror, in other words, about AI rebellions, which helped when I was doing some more lore background fiction for the game, and then just sort of created this idea of a world with artificial intelligences, which, if they got out from under your control, could be highly dangerous. Eventually, I was able to turn them into an entire playable faction, right? The premise being that, they got away from you for long enough to develop their own culture, their own civilization, and their own military hardware. In essence, over a period of what amounts to 6 years, I was able to evolve this concept and this little player-triggered event into something that's part of just woven into that universe and people's perception of it. So it worked out pretty well for me, and I'm just pointing out that that sort of thing can work out well for you if you work with it well. So I'm going to pick the redheaded stepchild of my career, Fort Zombie. It's like, I love this game secretly in my heart, but in the way that you love, the troubled child in your family. This game had a lot going for it that I still, loved it for. One of the things I loved it for was the fact that the editors, when we were creating it, were incredibly powerful. And they could do all sorts of things, which allowed me to be really evil in terms of imposing, narrative design onto the game in weird ways. So I have this very experimental game. It's, a light RPG. It's very sandbox. People enter neighborhoods that are made up of randomized tiles with architecture and all of this stuff. But, every piece of architecture was an opportunity for me to do something. Right? So, every piece of architecture can have signs or, billboards that are built into it, whatever. The building itself can have a message. And so, since I was trying to create the atmosphere of this town and also of a zombie apocalypse, I had a bit of fun with that. There's also, the matter of light, right, which I had minute control over and which I could use as a medium of communicating to the player. I could change the quality of light when things were much more zombie-intensive and corrupt in that terrain. I could change the frequency by which, a light bulb was stuttering, things like that, use it to create atmosphere. I could also use it to communicate what happened. All right, when a light is flickering on and off, or is, still brokenly twitching, it can tell you that something bad happened in this place, and that when you get closer to it, you're going to find that there's evidence of an attack, etc. And I had all control over props, and by props I mean everything from a tree to a section of fence to how a corpse was laid out, etc. I could ask for anything I wanted, any gender, any size of zombie, mutilated, horribly eaten body or whatever. But I could also control all sorts of other things, like cars in various states of repair, right? Posters, pictures, anything I wanted. And I could put them anywhere. Like this little garage sale that I have put together, I'm just basically using it as an example of how the editor allowed me to place props, right? It was this particulate, right? I could put them anywhere in any position, you know. But like I said, over time, as I was making this game, I realized that I had a lot of opportunity because I could use texture-based props. And all of a sudden, I have graffiti. And I can the artists on the team can turn out 100 graffiti a day if they were really working hard. And I decided to give the two factions in the game different colors of graffiti. So the zombie faction, they write in blood and gore and nasty, right? The human factions, when they're talking to each other behind the scenes, tend to use spray paint, which looks a little more wholesome, right? This is a game in which there are some, your whole mission in this game is to find all of the human survivors of this town and try to gather them into a fort where they're going to be safe, right? All of these messages are from the little characters that exist in the game to each other and sometimes to you, right? It's just another opportunity for me to play with, use the environment to tell a story in situations where I have no dialogue, etc. I'm just taking advantage of what I got. And that's it.